I woke up because something in the air felt wrong. At first, I could not understand why. It was the kind of instinctive alarm that drags you out of sleep before your mind has time to catch up. My throat felt scratchy, and the room had a strange heaviness to it, as if the air itself had thickened. When I inhaled again, the smell hit me. Burning plastic. Sharp, chemical, invasive. My heart kicked hard in my chest. I blinked at the soft glow of the clock on my nightstand reading 2:07, then swung my legs out of bed. The moment my feet touched the floor, a pulse of heat traveled through the wood. It was not the harmless kind of warmth from a heater or the sun. It radiated upward with a disturbing intensity that made every instinct in me come alive. I opened my bedroom door, and a wall of gray smoke rushed toward me. It filled the hallway with a suffocating thickness that instantly burned my eyes. I coughed hard, the sound tearing through my chest as I dropped low to the floor. My hand pressed against the wall for balance as I crawled forward, trying to stay under the worst of the smoke. Every breath scraped down my throat like sandpaper. The smell grew stronger as I moved toward the living room, and then I saw it, the faint orange glow against the far wall. Flames. The realization made my body go cold even as the heat climbed around me. A muffled pop echoed from the garage, followed by another louder and sharper. I knew enough to understand what that meant. Something inside had exploded. Something was feeding the flames. My pulse raced faster. I tried to rise to my feet, hoping to move faster, but the heat coming through the floor forced me down again. The fire was beneath me or inside the walls. It had already spread in ways I could not see. I pushed forward, coughing so violently my chest ached. My vision blurred with tears. I reached out for the entryway table and found nothing. It felt like the house had shifted around me. The smoke thickened until I could barely make out shapes anymore. Dizziness washed over me, a slow, creeping disorientation that made it difficult to keep crawling. I tried to call out for help, but the sound died in my throat. I stumbled toward the front window, thinking I could smash it open, but the heat struck my back like a wave. I looked up through the smoke, searching for the outline of the glass, and froze. A figure stood outside. I could see only a silhouette through the haze and the trembling reflection of firelight, but it was there, unmoving, watching. The posture was familiar in a way that stabbed through my confusion. The rounded shoulders, the tilt of the head, the way the weight shifted slightly to one leg. My mind protested, refusing to accept what my eyes showed me, but I knew that shape. I had grown up with it. It looked like my brother. My lungs seized as I tried to take another breath. The smoke had turned the air into something thick and punishing. My chest felt tight, desperate for oxygen. Another explosion erupted in the garage, louder this time, knocking me off balance. I reached for the window frame, but missed entirely. My body hit the floor, and this time the heat seared through my palms even though I pulled them away quickly. My vision narrowed, shrinking into a small ring of light surrounded by encroaching darkness. Through it, I saw the silhouette shift, not in panic, not to help, just stepping back into the shadows. At that exact moment, a beam of white light cut across the front of the house. A neighbor yelled something I could not understand. Someone else shouted to call emergency services. The silhouette flinched, then vanished completely. The sounds around me grew distant, muffled, almost underwater. My thoughts scattered as the smoke overwhelmed my lungs, but one truth remained sharp enough to cut through everything. He knew I was in the house. He knew, and he watched. The world dimmed. My body gave in. Hours later, when detectives told me the fire insurance had been purchased under my name, I finally understood the full truth of that terrible night. My brother had not simply watched my house burn. He had planned for me to burn with it, long before the fire, long before I watched my own life nearly disappear in a cloud of black smoke. My house represented something that no one in my family ever gave me. It was freedom, dignity, and proof that I mattered, even if they never believed I did. The road to that house was not glamorous or lucky or lined with support. It was built slowly through years that felt like a grindstone pressed against my ribs. There were mornings when I woke up in a cramped apartment that barely had enough space for a bed and a small table. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the upstairs neighbor walking, coughing, laughing, and arguing at 3 in the morning. I used to lie there, staring at a ceiling stained with water damage, promising myself that someday I would live in a place where the only footsteps I heard belonged to me. I worked jobs that drained every ounce of energy I had. There were months when I pulled 6-day work weeks, sometimes 7 when emergency shifts came up or when someone called out. I took every overtime offer because every extra dollar mattered. My coworkers spent their weekends on road trips or brunch or birthdays at lakeside cabins. I spent mine with a spreadsheet open on my laptop, calculating how much I could save if I skipped buying new shoes for another 3 months. I brought my own lunch in a beat-up container that I used for years. I made coffee at home because the few dollars I saved each day added up. When other people bought furniture, I repaired whatever I found at secondhand shops. I still remember sanding down a scratched table in my living room while sitting cross-legged on the floor, my fingers aching but my mind steady with purpose. I lived like that because I had to, not because I wanted to. My family always assumed I had money simply because I never asked for anything. They believed I was independent by choice, not because I had learned early in life that asking them for help came with strings conditions, guilt, and reminders that I was never their priority. I taught myself to handle things alone. When rent went up, I picked up extra shifts. When my car broke down, I rode the bus for months while saving for repairs. When I was sick, I still showed up to work because missing a day meant recalculating all my timelines. During those years of saving, the image of the house I wanted kept me moving. I used to scroll through listings during my lunch breaks, dreaming about quiet neighborhoods and porches that caught the morning sun. I wanted a place where I could grow plants without worrying that someone would steal them off the fire escape. I wanted to come home and feel peace, not tension. I wanted a space that was mine in a way nothing had ever been mine before. People talk about the American dream like it is a shiny concept that floats in the distance. For me, it was simple. Stability, a safe home, a clean kitchen, hot coffee in the morning sunlight, a place where I could put down a rug and know it would still be there the next day. Those were the things that mattered because for most of my life they felt out of reach. While I worked and saved, my family did not ask about my life, not really. They asked what I could afford to give or what favor I could perform or what problem they needed me to solve. My brother especially treated my hard work like a resource meant for him. When he made reckless choices, everyone expected me to help fix the fallout. When he failed at something, I was told to support him. When he got himself into trouble, they all repeated the same line that had followed me throughout childhood. Family helps family. That phrase never meant that they would show up for me. It only meant that I existed to absorb the consequences of everyone else's mistakes. Saving for my house became a secret rebellion, a quiet promise to myself that I would not let their expectations swallow me forever. I sometimes imagined what they would say if they found out how much I had in savings, and the thought made me guard the information even more closely. I knew exactly what would happen if my brother discovered that I was building a nest egg. He would find a way to claim he needed it more. My parents would guilt me about being cold-hearted if I did not give in. They would say it was selfish to keep something for myself when he was struggling. So I kept my dream quiet. I kept my savings quiet. I kept my hope quiet. It took years, painful years, before I reached the number I needed. The first time I saw the house that would eventually become mine, I stood on the front porch and felt something inside me loosen. The place needed work. The fence was chipped and the porch railing wobbled under my hand. The lawn had more weeds than grass, but there was sunlight pouring through the front windows, painting the living room in gold. There was a small garden bed waiting to be revived. There was a quiet street with neighbors who waved and smiled. It was imperfect, but it was real, and it could be mine. When my offer was accepted, I cried. Not delicate tears, but the kind that come from deep inside your chest. Not because I had bought a house, but because I had finally built something that belonged to me alone. Every sacrifice, every long night, every time I forced myself to keep going, all of it had led to that moment. My family never understood the weight of that achievement. They never understood what the house meant or how hard I had worked for it. To them, it was just property, something that could be sold or traded or sacrificed whenever my brother needed money. To me, it was the first place where I felt safe, the first place where I did not feel like a tool or a backup plan, the first place where I could breathe without waiting for someone to demand something from me. The house was my freedom, and that is why losing it could never be an option. It was the one thing in my life that I had earned entirely on my own. That is why the night of the fire felt like more than an attempt to kill me. It felt like an attempt to erase everything I had built and everything I had survived to reach that point. I grew up in a family where the roles were assigned long before I understood what any of them meant. My brother was the one who mattered. I was the one who managed. That is how it always felt. He got praise for the smallest effort while I had to accomplish something remarkable just to be acknowledged. He was the one my parents protected, defended, and adored. I was the one they leaned on expected things from and blamed when life did not go the way they wanted. This imbalance was not something that started when we became adults. It was woven into the fabric of our childhood. My earliest memories are filled with moments where my brother broke, something failed something, or quit something, and my parents either laughed it off or blamed me for distracting him. Whenever he got in trouble at school, they called him creative or misunderstood. Whenever I earned an award, they called me lucky. The more I worked, the less it mattered, and the less he worked, the more they admired him. There was a phrase my mother repeated so often that it became a kind of family motto. Helping your brother is your duty as a sister. She said it lightly at first, almost with a laugh as if it were a harmless reminder. But as we grew older, it became a command. It meant giving him my share of things, giving him my time, giving him my allowance, giving him space to avoid consequences for his behavior. My father reinforced it in quieter ways. When my brother wanted something expensive, he found a way to get it, even if it meant cutting corners. When I wanted something, he told me to work harder because life did not hand out favors. My brother could fail every class for a semester, and the family would rally around him with excuses about stress or unfair teachers. If I brought home a single grade that was not perfect, they questioned how I could let them down after they had raised me better than that. This kind of bias shapes you before you realize it is happening. I learned early that I could not rely on anyone at home. If I needed something, I had to figure it out myself. If something broke, I fixed it. If a chore was forgotten, I did it. If a bill arrived, I covered it. My parents taught my brother that the world would bend for him. They taught me that the world would not bend at all. The strange thing is that I did not fully resent him back then. I resented the rules, the expectations, the unfairness. But there was a part of me that believed my parents when they said he needed help more than I did. I thought I was being responsible, mature, strong. I thought helping him made me a good sister. I thought it would bring us closer. Instead, it created a pattern that followed us well into adulthood. He never learned to hold a job because someone always rescued him. He never learned to handle money because someone always bailed him out. He never learned to take responsibility because someone always blamed the world for him. My parents reinforced every bad habit he developed. They did not notice the drinking until it became a problem. They did not notice his gambling until they had to take out a loan. They did not notice the lies until they became impossible to ignore. Even then, they excused him. They always found someone else to blame. Bad friends, bad luck, bad timing, never him. And when he did something especially irresponsible, they came to me. They asked me to help, to talk to him, to pay something for him to guide him, because supposedly he listened to me more than to them. That was not true. He did not listen to me. He listened to the benefits he got from manipulating everyone around him. I do not know when I realized that my parents were not just misguided. They were enabling him to a degree that bordered on dangerous. The first time was probably when I was still young and he totaled his car while driving without insurance. My father blamed the road conditions. My mother blamed the mechanic. No one blamed the fact that my brother had been drinking that night. They sold one of their valuables to cover the costs. They told him it was not his fault. They told me to be more understanding because he was going through a tough time. He always was. Every year of his life was apparently a tough time. That was the foundation of the home I grew up in. One child who was never held accountable. One child who was always expected to carry the weight. The imbalance became clearer as we became adults. I worked, saved, paid bills, and learned to stand on my own. He bounced from job to job, spent money he did not have, and relied on my parents to catch him every time he fell. They never encouraged him to stop making reckless choices because it meant admitting they had raised him without teaching him responsibility. It was easier for them to expect me to fix whatever he damaged. They believed I owed him some kind of lifelong debt simply for being the more capable one. My mother said once that my brother needed more love because he had a softer heart. My father said he needed more support because life was harder for him than for me. I remember looking at them that day and realizing with absolute clarity that they had no idea who I was. They thought strength meant I could carry anything. They thought silence meant I was fine. They thought I did not need help because I never asked for it, even though the reason I never asked was that they never gave it freely. My brother grew up believing he was special. I grew up believing I had to earn every inch of ground I stood on. I did not understand how deep the imbalance ran until they asked me to sell my house. That was the moment I saw clearly how they valued him more than me. It was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was the result of years of conditioning that taught them to see him first and me last. That realization hurt in a way I cannot fully describe, but it also gave me something I had never allowed myself before: perspective. The night of the fire did not create the betrayal. It only exposed what had been there all along. The disaster that pulled the last thread holding my family together did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, disguised as the same kind of crisis my brother had created 100 times before. At first, I dismissed it as another predictable moment in a long line of irresponsible choices. But I quickly learned that this one had gone far beyond anything he had ever done. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was at work. I ignored it because the screen showed my mother's name, and I had been trying to create some emotional distance from their constant demands. 5 minutes later, a text arrived asking me to come over for a family meeting that Saturday. Family meeting was usually code for something my brother had broken, lost, or neglected. I sighed, put the phone face down, and told myself I would not let them ruin my week. By Saturday evening, I convinced myself to go. Not because I expected anything good to come of it, but because some part of me still clung to the idea that maybe they would surprise me. I should have known better. The moment I walked through the front door, the tension in the air felt charged and familiar, like the atmosphere before a storm. My mother hovered near the kitchen counter, wringing her hands. My father sat in his recliner, tapping his fingers against the armrest. My brother, of course, was nowhere in sight, which usually meant he was waiting for a dramatic entrance. I had barely taken off my jacket when my mother said he had something important to tell us. Important usually meant expensive. My father cleared his throat, looked at me with a grave expression, and said they needed my understanding. My stomach dropped. Those were never the words you wanted to hear in this house. My brother finally entered the living room carrying a laptop and a stack of loose papers. He wore his best attempt at a serious expression, the one he used when he wanted to appear responsible. He set the papers down, opened the laptop, and showed me what looked like financial charts, line graphs, and projected returns. It was a poorly assembled pitch deck, the kind people cobble together at 2 a.m. after watching too many motivational videos. He launched into a speech about a business investment he had made, something about crypto real estate rentals, small-scale flipping, and short-term leasing. It was a jumble of buzzwords and online dream talk, but he delivered it like a preacher delivering a prophecy. My parents nodded along, eyes wide, as if he were presenting a miracle. When he finally paused for breath, he showed me an account balance. Negative $300,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mother gasped like it was the first time she had seen the number, even though her reaction told me she had known for days. My father stared at the screen, jaw tight, still trying to process the scale of the disaster. My brother let out a heavy sigh, as if he were the victim of some terrible misfortune, rather than the architect of his own ruin. He claimed it had all been a misunderstanding, a sudden market downturn, a temporary setback. He insisted that with the right injection of money, he could stabilize everything. My mother placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. My father muttered that sometimes life was unfair. I stood there stunned as they shifted their focus toward me. They had rehearsed this moment. My mother spoke first. She said they knew how hard I had worked for my house and how proud they were of me. The compliment felt like a setup, and it was. She then said that family needed to take care of each other and that my brother was facing something dangerous. My father added that he had already tried everything he could and that my brother needed immediate help. They claimed the lenders were threatening legal action or worse. My brother stared at me with wide eyes full of false desperation. Then he said the words that made the room tilt. "If you sell your house, you can help me fix this." I froze. They all looked at me with expectation, as if they had asked me to pass the salt and not risk my entire future. My brother rushed to add that the market was strong and that I could buy another place later. My mother nodded in agreement, insisting that apartments can be nice and that sometimes sacrifices had to be made. My father added that I was young and capable and that I had plenty of time to rebuild. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. They saw my house not as something I had fought for, sweated for, and sacrificed for. They saw it as an emergency fund they believed they had automatic rights to. They had already decided it was the solution. They assumed I would obey out of loyalty, guilt, or habit. I stood silently for a moment, letting the weight of the request settle over me. I thought about the years I had struggled alone, the nights I had stayed awake, calculating how to stretch my paycheck, the times I had helped my brother only for him to waste the opportunity. I thought about my parents encouraging every reckless choice he made while dismissing every responsible one I made. I felt something inside me crack not loudly, but with a quiet finality. I told them no. My mother recoiled like I had slapped her. My father's face twisted with disbelief. My brother stared at me as if betrayal flowed only in one direction and I had delivered the first cut. They all spoke at once, accusing me of being selfish, cruel, cold, and uncaring. The storm I had anticipated finally broke. I repeated my refusal, and the refusal was not just for this moment. It was for every moment before it. My father finally snapped and said that if I walked out without helping, I was no longer part of the family. My mother nodded in agreement, tears streaming down her face. My brother sat silently waiting for the verdict like a judge instead of the cause of every problem. I looked at them and felt years of exhaustion settle into my bones. Then I walked out the door. That $300,000 disaster did not just expose my brother's recklessness. It exposed the truth about what I meant to them. I was never family unless I was useful. The night I walked out of my parents' home after refusing to sell my house should have felt like a victory, but instead it felt like a cold blade sliding between my ribs. The air outside was crisp, and for a moment I stood on their porch, unable to breathe, unable to process the finality of what had just happened. My mother's last words still echoed behind me, sharp and unmistakable. "If you leave without helping your brother, you are no longer part of this family." My father had not softened it. He had not tried to rephrase it into something gentler. He had looked right at me, eyes filled with the disappointment I had been trained to fear, and said that I was walking away from them forever. The accusation lingered like smoke. I stepped off the porch, hands shaking, and walked toward my car. My throat felt tight, but no tears came. I was too stunned to cry. I had always known on some level that my place in the family was conditional, but hearing them say it out loud stripped away the last layer of denial I had clung to. When I reached the car, the first raindrops began to fall. They tapped against the windshield soft and steady, as if the sky had been waiting for this moment to finally break open. I sat down in the driver's seat and closed the door, the sound of my mother crying inside the house muffled into nothing. I stared at the steering wheel and waited for the grief to slam into me, but instead there was a hollow stillness in my chest. Not peace, not relief. Something quieter, like the silence that follows a long argument when you finally realize the other person never intended to understand you. I drove home slowly, the rain picking up until it blurred the world outside. Each streetlight stretched into streaks of gold against the wet pavement. My wipers struggled to keep up, and for a moment I wondered if I should pull over. My hands were trembling harder than before, and I had to force my grip to steady. The drive felt endless even though it was only 20 minutes. When I finally reached my apartment, I parked and sat in the car, listening to the rain drum against the roof. That was when the tears finally came. Not loud, messy sobs, quiet ones, the kind that slip down your cheeks while your body stays perfectly still. They came from exhaustion more than heartbreak. I did not just lose my family that night. I lost the illusion that they had ever seen me as anything more than a solution to their problems. I walked into my apartment, dropped my keys on the counter, and collapsed onto the couch. The familiar smell of old books and lavender detergent wrapped around me like a thin blanket. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the storm outside, and let the reality sink in. I was alone. Completely and officially alone. No parents checking in. No brother pretending to care when he needed something. No family dinners filled with tension and unspoken expectations. For a moment, that thought nearly crushed me. There was a part of me that still felt like the child who tried to earn her parents' approval. That part wanted to go back to apologize to make everything right, even if it meant sacrificing everything I had built. But another voice spoke louder, a voice I had ignored for too many years. The voice that said, I deserved better. I deserved a place where my worth was not measured by what I could give away. In the days that followed, I waited for someone to call. I checked my phone obsessively, not because I wanted to hear from them, but because I needed to know whether their threat had been real. It was. No one called, no one texted, no one asked if I made it home safely. They had cut me out with the same swiftness and confidence they used when they expected me to fix something. It felt surreal to move through my routine while carrying the weight of what had happened. I went to work, answered emails, completed tasks, and smiled at coworkers, all while feeling hollow inside. I knew that people could function while grieving, but I did not expect how automatic everything would feel. Each night, I came home to the same quiet apartment. At first, that quiet felt suffocating. Eventually, it felt honest. A week after the confrontation, I drove to the house I had bought months earlier. I had not yet moved into it because renovations were still underway, but I needed to see it to remind myself why I had refused to sell it, why I had taken the stand that tore my family apart. The house looked calm and untouched in the soft afternoon light. I walked up the porch steps and placed my hand on the railing that I planned to repaint. The wood felt rough under my fingers, real and solid. This house was not fancy. It was not large, but it was mine. Every dollar spent on it had come from my own effort, not from favors or help or luck, from me. Standing there, I felt something inside me shift, a quiet resolve, the kind that says you may have lost something, but you gained something more important. I had always belonged to them, to their expectations, their demands, their version of loyalty. But for the first time, I belonged to myself. The rain had stopped by the time I walked back to my car. The sky had cleared to a pale blue. I drove away from the house with a feeling that I had not expected, a feeling not of grief, but of beginning. The day they cast me out was the day I stopped belonging to them. It was the day I finally started to belong to myself. Moving into my house felt like stepping into a version of my life that I had spent years imagining but never truly believed I would reach. After the confrontation with my family, the silence in my apartment had felt heavy and suffocating, but the silence inside my house was different. It was soft, warm, and almost sacred. I remember the day I carried the first box through the front door. The house was still half finished with paint samples on the walls and tools scattered across the floor, but to me, it looked perfect. Sunlight streamed through the front windows in long, gentle beams that lit up the hardwood floors, the smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint scent of new beginnings. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of expanding space around me, not just physically, but emotionally. It felt like I could finally breathe without waiting for someone to ask me for something. The first room I set up was the kitchen because it was the heart of what I wanted my new life to be. I put my old battered coffee maker on the counter beside a small potted basil plant that I had been nurturing for months. I arranged my mismatched plates in the cabinet and smiled because they belonged to me, and me alone. Every mug, every fork, every little thing that filled the cabinets represented years of work and choice and independence. I spent the first morning sitting at the small wooden table I had bought from a thrift store years ago. I drank coffee while watching the sunlight creep across the counter. I had never felt more grounded. It was not just a house. It was proof that I had survived everything my family had taken from me and everything they had refused to give. I spent the next few weeks transforming the place room by room. I repainted the bedroom walls a calm shade of blue that made me feel safe when I woke up. I patched small cracks and scrubbed floors until my back ached. I spent entire evenings in the garden pulling weeds and loosening soil until my hands were dirty and raw. But I loved every moment. Working on the house felt like therapy, like I was tending to old wounds by building something beautiful from the inside out. The backyard was my favorite space. It was an overgrown mess when I moved in, but under the chaos I saw potential. There were wildflowers hidden beneath the weeds and a small stone path nearly swallowed up by grass. I spent hours kneeling in the dirt clearing the space, planting herbs, arranging stones, and restoring the neglected flower bed. Every time I stepped outside, I felt the world quiet around me. I listened to birds in the morning and crickets in the evening. I watched the sky change colors at dusk and felt myself soften in ways I did not expect. Inside the house, I created small pockets of peace. A reading nook by the window with a soft blanket and a lamp that cast warm circles of light. A shelf with plants that I watered every morning before work. A framed print above my bed that said, "My life is my own." At night, I cooked simple meals and left the windows open to let the cool air in. I sat outside on the small porch swing I installed and listened to the sound of distant traffic. Sometimes I played music. Sometimes I sat in silence. Sometimes I talked aloud, not because anyone was listening, but because I finally had space to hear myself. The house became a reflection of a life I was building without guilt or obligation, a life where rest did not have to be earned by overworking myself, a life where I could choose softness without being accused of weakness, a life where no one would burst through the door demanding explanations or sacrifices. As the months passed, I grew into my new routine like a plant leaning toward sunlight. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see the morning light fill the living room. I cooked breakfasts that I ate slowly instead of on the go. I learned how to repair loose cabinet handles and unclog sinks. I painted the porch railing white and learned how to use a drill without feeling intimidated. On weekends, I visited the local hardware store and listened to people talk about home projects with the same excitement I felt. I began to understand the quiet pride people felt in maintaining something that was truly theirs. The neighbors would wave when I walked outside, and eventually a few introduced themselves. There was something comforting about living among people who expected nothing from me other than basic kindness. I did not tell them about my family. I did not tell them about the night I had been cast out. They saw me as someone starting fresh, and for once that was exactly how I wanted to be seen. The peace I found in that house was not dramatic or overwhelming. It was slow and steady like the way water smooths a stone over time. It settled into my bones and reminded me that not all quiet is emptiness. Sometimes quiet is healing. Sometimes quiet is safety. Sometimes quiet is the sound of a life that no longer belongs to chaos. I knew my family would not stay away forever. People like them did not walk away from potential resources. They only walked away until they needed something again. But for a while they were silent, and I allowed myself to believe that maybe they had moved on. Maybe they had accepted my decision. Maybe I could live in my house without expecting their shadows to appear at the door. Even if I sensed that was wishful thinking, the peace I felt was real. It filled the spaces in my chest that had been hollow for years. My home made me feel safe. My home made me feel whole. My home made me believe that I was allowed to build a life where I was not responsible for carrying everyone else. My home was my peace, and that peace was the very thing my brother would soon try to destroy. The day my brother came back into my life did not arrive with warning or subtlety. It came the way storms do on summer afternoons, sudden and heavy and impossible to ignore. I had just returned home from work, balancing grocery bags in my arms, humming softly to myself as I unlocked the front door. The late afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows across the yard, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. Then I saw him. He was sitting on the porch steps like he belonged there. Elbows on his knees, head hung low. a posture meant to signal defeat or vulnerability. But even from a distance, something in me tightened. His presence felt like an old bruise being pressed again. I stopped walking, the grocery bag handles digging into my hands. He looked up slowly, as if rehearsing the dramatic reveal of a broken man seeking forgiveness. His eyes were sunken, and his clothes looked worn, but the expression on his face was the same one I had seen since childhood, the expression that said he expected me to fix whatever he had messed up. I took a breath before speaking, grounding myself because I knew exactly where this was heading. "What are you doing here?" My voice sounded calmer than I felt. He gave a half smile, a mixture of charm and pity he used when he wanted something. "I came to talk." I did not move closer. I did not unlock the door. I simply stared at him, waiting for the real reason to show itself. He cleared his throat and launched into a story about how everything had fallen apart after I left that night months ago. He described losing his job, losing access to his accounts, and losing the support he had relied on from our parents. He painted himself as a victim of circumstance, the tragic hero in his own narrative. I listened without interrupting, not because I believed him, but because I knew this performance had a script and I wanted him to get to the part that mattered. When he finally reached the climax of his story, he paused dramatically. "I need your help." There it was. The words that had been chasing me my entire life. He said them with the same confidence he had always used, as if the request were reasonable, even expected. My stomach clenched. I shifted the grocery bags in my arms, feeling their weight increase. "Help with what?" I asked. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees again, hands clasped as if he were preparing to pray. He spoke of debts and threats. He spoke of people coming after him. He spoke of danger. His tone wavered just enough to sound sincere, but there was a coldness in his eyes that told me the story had been rehearsed. I knew that look well. It was the look he wore when he lied convincingly enough to make others question themselves. I told him I was sorry to hear it, but that I could not get involved. He straightened up, the mask slipping slightly. He asked if I was really going to let my own brother suffer. The implication hung in the air like a heavy fog. He wanted me to feel guilty. He wanted me to feel responsible. He wanted me to forget all the times he had chosen himself at my expense. I finally set the grocery bags down on the porch and crossed my arms, placing a barrier between us. I reminded him that I had already sacrificed enough for him. I reminded him of the night I was cast out. I reminded him that he had been the reason I had built my life alone. He dismissed my words with a shrug, saying the past did not matter now and that family should help each other. That phrase stabbed deeper than I expected. It was the same phrase my parents had thrown at me over and over, the same phrase that had justified every demand, the same phrase they had used to exile me when I no longer complied. I told him that kind of family was not mine anymore. He looked offended not by the truth, but by the nerve I had to say it out loud. He stood up with a sudden burst of energy and closed the distance between us just enough to unsettle me. He said I was being dramatic. He said he was desperate. Then he said the words that made my blood run cold. "You owe me." He did not raise his voice. He said it soft and steady, like he believed it unquestioningly. I stepped back and reached for the door. I told him I did not owe him anything and that he needed to leave. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes, a sharp glint that made my skin crawl. It was gone, just as quickly replaced by a bitter smirk. He said I would regret turning him away. He walked off the porch slowly with the swagger of someone who believed he held more power than he actually did. I watched him leave, but the unease he carried stayed behind like a shadow clinging to the edges of my house. I brought the groceries inside, but my hands shook as I unpacked them. That night, I could not sleep. I kept replaying his words, the tone, the expression, the threat wrapped in disappointment. His return was not a coincidence. It was not a moment of weakness. It was a warning. The next morning, I found footprints in the damp soil by my window. They were fresh, too fresh, and for the first time since moving into my home, my peace felt fragile. My brother had returned, and nothing about his return felt like a visit. It felt like the beginning of something far darker. The first red flag did not arrive in the form of something dramatic or frightening. It came quietly, almost politely hidden inside an envelope that looked like ordinary mail. At the time, I had no idea that opening that letter would become the moment when unease transformed into dread. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I had just come home from work. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and scooped up the small stack of envelopes from the floor where the mail had slid through the slot. Most of it was junk mail, the usual flood of credit card offers and local advertisements, but one letter stood out. It was addressed to me with my full name printed neatly above my house address, and in the upper corner was the name of a major insurance company I recognized. At first I thought it might be another generic promotion or a homeowner's discount offer, the kind I routinely tossed aside. But the envelope felt heavier than a typical flyer, and when I tore it open, I felt my stomach tighten. Inside was a thick packet with a header that made no sense to me. Fire insurance policy confirmation. My eyes skimmed the lines quickly, trying to make sense of the document. It congratulated me on activating my new coverage plan, listing policy numbers, deductibles, maximum claim values, and monthly premium amounts. It listed my house, my address, my name, my signature. Or rather, something meant to look like my signature, but did not match mine exactly. It was a sloppy imitation, the kind someone might produce after copying it once or twice. At that moment, a chill went through me so sharply that I had to sit down. I stared at the signature again, the uneven lines, the awkward slant, the blatant wrongness of it. Someone had signed my name. Someone had applied for a fire insurance policy on my house. Someone had done it recently. The date showed it had been processed less than 2 weeks earlier. I immediately called the insurance company. While waiting on hold, my heartbeat thudded in my ears. The representative finally picked up her voice, cheerful and casual, completely unaware that the document she was about to explain had just turned my blood cold. I told her I had received a policy confirmation for a policy I did not purchase. She asked for my information, my address, the policy number. I provided everything while pacing the living room, feeling the floor beneath my feet shift from solid to something closer to quicksand. She placed me on a brief hold to verify the account. When she returned, her tone had changed slightly as though she sensed something was off. She informed me the application had been submitted online. I told her again that I had never applied. She hesitated before saying the digital signature matched the one provided during verification. I asked how they verified it. She said the system cross-referenced basic personal data points along with an uploaded ID photo. My breath caught. An uploaded photo. I exhaled slowly as a cold realization crept up my spine. Someone had access to my personal information enough to impersonate me online. Someone had used my name, my address, my house information. Someone had taken the time to sign my name. And only one person had recently re-entered my life, desperate for money and drowning in debt. I asked the representative if she could send me the IP address used for the application as part of a fraud review. She said she could escalate my case. She asked if I suspected identity theft. I almost laughed because the question felt like an understatement. When the call ended, I placed the packet of documents on the table and stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. My brother had been on my porch a week earlier, pleading and threatening in the same breath. He had mentioned people coming after him implied he was in danger. Now I was holding proof that someone had taken out a fire insurance policy on my home without my knowledge. It did not take much imagination to connect the dots. Not enough for evidence, but enough for dread. I tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe it was identity theft unrelated to him. Maybe someone had mixed up addresses. But no matter how hard I tried to talk myself out of it, something in my chest stayed tight and unmovable. People like my brother did not ask for help once. They asked until you gave in or until they found another way. And sometimes another way was far worse than anything you wanted to imagine. That night I could not sleep. I lay awake listening to every creak of the house, every shift of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows. It felt as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I checked the locks twice, then 3 times. At one point, I got up and walked from room to room, touching the doorknobs, checking the windows, listening for footsteps outside. I kept seeing that forged signature in my mind, the way the lines trembled, the way it tried too hard to look real. Forgery was a violation, but this felt bigger than that. It felt like someone had reached into my life and twisted something sacred. It felt like the opening act of something much darker. I woke the next morning exhausted, the faint ache behind my eyes reminding me that peace was slipping from my grip. The first red flag had arrived quietly, but its meaning thundered inside me. Someone had plans for my house, and whoever it was, they had used my name to start those plans. The days following the forged insurance letter unfolded with a tension so thick it seemed to cling to the walls of my home, a steady pulse of dread that followed me from room to room and refused to loosen its grip. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that fear was distorting everything, but the world around me began offering reminders that intuition was not always wrong. The first sign came late one night when my doorbell rang at exactly 11:15. It was a sharp, insistent press, the kind that came from someone who wanted attention rather than someone who had made a simple mistake. I froze in the hallway, every instinct telling me not to approach the door. I peeked through the peephole only to find emptiness on the porch. No car, no person, nothing but the faint glow of the streetlight stretching across the walkway. I stood there for nearly 5 minutes, heart pounding, waiting for movement. Eventually, I stepped back, locked the deadbolt, even though it was already locked, and told myself it must have been kids or a delivery mistake. But the unease stayed. 2 days later, I walked outside to get the morning paper and noticed faint footprints in the damp soil near my bedroom window. They were too large to be mine and too fresh to have been old. They led from the side of the yard to the window and then back toward the fence. They were deliberate steps, the kind that did not wander but approached with purpose. I knelt closer, staring at the imprint of a shoe sole I did not recognize. My breath fogged in the morning air. Someone had been standing outside my window. I called the non-emergency police line and explained what I had found. The officer who arrived was kind but pragmatic. Without damage, without trespass on camera, without a clear threat, there was little they could do. He suggested better lighting a camera system and staying alert. He wrote a report more for my peace of mind than for legal weight. When he left, I stood on the porch feeling both grateful and strangely exposed. That afternoon, I installed extra cameras. I placed one facing the porch, one by the driveway, one overlooking the backyard. I kept the blinds closed in the evenings and slept with the lamp on. I hated that I was living like this, turning my home, my sanctuary, into a fortress of second-guessing and vigilance. But ignoring reality had never protected anyone. The third sign came a week after the late-night doorbell. I was washing dishes when I heard a faint metallic click from inside the garage. A quiet, deliberate sound. I froze water still running over my hands and listened. There it was again, a slow movement of metal against metal, like someone testing the latch. I turned off the water and stepped carefully toward the garage door that led into the house. I pressed my ear to it, heart pounding in my throat. Another click. A slow exhale of breath. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and called the police again. By the time officers arrived, whoever had been there was gone. The garage door showed signs that someone had tried to lift it manually from the outside. It had not opened because I had installed extra locks years ago, but the attempt was obvious. The officers suggested a reinforced bar for the garage door and asked if I had enemies or an ex-partner who might be harassing me. I shook my head, too stunned and embarrassed to explain that the only person who had reason to torment me was my own brother. I spent that night sitting on the living room couch with every light on. I watched shadows shift across the wall and jumped at the smallest sound. Fear wrapped itself around me like a second skin. I knew something was happening, something methodical and escalating, but I did not yet understand the scale. The fourth sign arrived in the form of a car. A dark SUV I did not recognize. It appeared outside my house at random times, but always late at night. It parked across the street, engine off, no lights. The first night I saw it, I told myself it was a neighbor's guest or someone checking GPS directions. But then it returned the next night, and the night after that. The windows were tinted so I could not see the driver. The car sat there quietly for 10 or 15 minutes before leaving, never longer. Never shorter. It felt like surveillance. It felt like a warning. I wrote down the license plate and called the police again, but the car was registered out of state, and without proof of wrongdoing, there was nothing they could officially pursue. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind, like every strange sound or unfamiliar shape might be danger approaching. I stopped gardening in the evenings. I stopped taking walks after sunset. I triple-checked the locks before bed. I kept my phone fully charged at all times. The fifth sign came in the form of my own memory. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the kitchen and replayed every interaction with my brother over the past months. His desperation, his anger, the forged insurance policy, the threat he had tried to disguise as disappointment. His words echoed in my head, "You owe me." I felt a shiver run through me. For the first time, I allowed myself to say the truth I had been avoiding. He was not just spiraling. He was planning. And someone who believed the world owed him something could justify almost anything. The next morning, as I took out the trash, I noticed something new. A gas can sitting near the edge of the property line. It was old and dented, but it did not belong to me. I stared at it for a long time, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I picked it up carefully, hands trembling, and carried it inside to photograph it. I placed it in the garage for safekeeping, but even touching it made me feel sick. The signs were no longer subtle or scattered. They were converging. Something was coming. Someone was crossing lines with increasing boldness. And beneath all of it was the terrifying certainty that danger was no longer circling my life. It was closing in. I had spent days trying to convince myself that the strange noises, the late-night doorbell, the footprints near my window, the tampered garage door, and the unfamiliar SUV were coincidences, fragments of fear that my mind had stitched together into something larger, but the truth arrived in one violent instant that ripped away every layer of denial I had clung to. The night of the fire began in a silence so heavy it felt unnatural, the kind of silence that presses against your skin rather than soothes it. I woke abruptly around 1:30 in the morning, my heart pounding like I had been running in a dream, and for a few seconds I could not understand what had yanked me out of sleep. Then I smelled it. Burning plastic, sharp and chemical, the kind of smell that makes the back of your throat sting. I sat up fast, blinking in the dark, and within seconds I noticed the haze of thin smoke drifting through the crack at the top of my bedroom door. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, and my feet hit the floor, and I froze in disbelief as a low, muffled boom echoed from the direction of the garage, loud enough to shake the walls just slightly. It was not the sound of something natural. It was deliberate. A second later, the smoke thickened. I rushed to the door and touched it with the back of my hand. It was warm. That was the moment my brain stopped pretending this was anything but intentional. Someone had lit the garage on fire while I was asleep, and the only person who had a motive, who had been hovering around my home in the shadows, who had forged an insurance policy in my name, was my own brother. My hands shook as I opened the bedroom door and immediately coughed as smoke flooded toward me in a sinking wave. The hallway lights flickered weakly, barely cutting through the haze. I dropped low to the floor like every fire safety drill had taught us when we were kids, crawling forward as the heat intensified with every inch. The air burned as it filled my lungs, and I tried to focus on each movement to keep panic from swallowing me. When I reached the end of the hallway, I felt the first lick of real heat from the direction of the garage door, a radiating pulse that told me the fire was not small anymore. It was growing fast, too fast, spreading like it had been fed accelerant. I could hear wood cracking, metal popping, and the terrifying roar of flame rising. I pushed myself down the stairs, gripping the railing, but halfway down I slipped because the polished wood was slick with smoke residue. My shoulder slammed into the wall, and pain shot down my arm, but the adrenaline forced me back up on my feet before I could think about it. I reached the living room, and the entire space was already glowing a dull orange from the fire on the other side of the garage door. The heat radiating through the door was so intense that I knew opening it would be suicide. My only hope was the front door or a window. I grabbed the doorknob of the front door, but pulled my hand back immediately because the metal was blisteringly hot, meaning flames had reached the porch. Through the fog of smoke, I stumbled toward the nearest window, coughing so hard my chest felt torn open, and with trembling fingers I tried to slide it up. It jammed, swollen from the heat. I shoved harder, but the mechanism would not budge. My vision blurred and my eyes streamed from the smoke, and when I looked up, I froze completely. Through the smoke and the darkness beyond the window, I saw a silhouette standing outside, not moving, just watching. Broad shoulders, familiar posture, a shape my mind recognized even before the truth reached my throat. It was him, my brother. He stood there in the glow of the fire like he was witnessing something he had planned and was waiting for the final outcome. Pure terror surged through me. I backed away from the window, stumbling until I hit the coffee table. My lungs screamed for air. I tried to call out for help, but the smoke clawed at my throat and choked off the words. My knees buckled, and I crashed to the floor, gasping, reaching for anything to pull myself up, but the world was starting to spin in slow circles. I heard a distant shout from somewhere outside, a neighbor yelling something urgent, and then another voice shouting to call emergency services. I crawled toward the back door, each inch feeling like a mile, and my fingers brushed the bottom edge of the frame, just as the roaring sound of flame behind me intensified a violent whoosh that told me the fire had broken through another barrier. My vision flickered in and out as if someone was dimming a light switch. I forced one more breath into my lungs, and then everything went black as I collapsed with my hand still reaching toward the cold metal of the doorknob. My last thought as consciousness slipped away was a single, horrifying truth. My brother had not just tried to scare me. He had come to kill me. When consciousness finally clawed its way back to me, it did not arrive gently, but in a violent rush of sound and sensation that made my head spin. I woke to the sharp beeping of a monitor and the sterile smell of disinfectant pressing against my senses. My lungs felt raw, as if every breath scraped against sandpaper, and a blazing ache pulsed across my ribs and shoulder. For a moment, I could not tell where I was or how I had gotten there, and then the memory of heat smoke and the silhouette outside the window crashed down on me in a wave so overwhelming it forced a broken gasp from my throat. I blinked hard, my vision clearing just enough to reveal the pale ceiling tiles of a hospital room and the soft glow of a machine beside my bed. A nurse appeared in my field of vision, her expression shifting from focused professionalism to calm reassurance as she realized I was awake. "You are safe," she said gently, placing a cool hand on my wrist. "You inhaled a dangerous amount of smoke. You are lucky to be alive." The words struck me like a physical blow because I already knew they were true. I remembered the heat curling through the hall, the fire roaring with unnatural speed, the window jammed shut. My brother standing outside, watching my home burn with the stillness of someone who believed no one could see him. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through my chest, and the nurse urged me to lie back. "You need to take it slow. You passed out from smoke inhalation, and the firefighters pulled you out through the back door." I shut my eyes tight, swallowing hard, because hearing that someone had saved me meant I had come within seconds of dying. The nurse explained that the firefighters had arrived within minutes thanks to a neighbor who had seen the flames and called 911. The thought of that neighbor watching my house burn from his yard while I lay unconscious inside made my stomach twist. After she left, I stared at the window across the room, watching daylight filter through the blinds, and wondered how long it would take before I stopped hearing the fire that almost ended my life. A detective arrived not long after, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a notebook worn around the edges, the kind of person who had seen too much but still cared enough to show compassion. He introduced himself as Detective Harlan and explained that he was investigating the fire. I asked him the question that had been burning in my mind from the moment I woke up. Was it arson? He hesitated only a moment before answering. "The preliminary report suggests possible accelerant. There was an explosion in the garage, and fire spread patterns that do not match accidental origin." My throat tightened. "Did anyone see anything?" He nodded slightly and opened his notebook. A neighbor spotted a vehicle leaving the area just before flames became visible. We also have security footage from 2 homes across the street. It captured portions of a vehicle parked down the block before and during the fire. My heartbeat quickened because I already knew whose vehicle it was even before he showed me the still frame on his phone. The grainy video displayed a dark SUV with a dent above the rear wheel, while the exact same one I had seen idling outside my home night after night. I felt cold all over, colder than the hospital room could account for. The detective watched my reaction carefully. "Do you recognize the vehicle?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I felt frozen between fear and the overwhelming certainty of the truth. After a moment, I managed to whisper, "I think it belongs to my brother." He wrote something down without changing expression. "Has there been conflict between you and your brother recently?" That question made something inside me crack wide open. I told him everything. The forged insurance letter, the threats disguised as family loyalty, the late-night doorbell, the footprints outside my window, the garage door that had been tampered with, the strange SUV, the gas can I found near my property line. I recounted each detail with a trembling voice and felt the weight of all the fear I had been swallowing for weeks finally rise to the surface. Detective Harlan listened without interrupting, only asking small clarifying questions, and when I finished, he sat quietly for a long moment before closing his notebook. "None of this looks good," he said plainly. "We will need to verify each part of your statement, but the insurance policy under your name is already a major red flag. The fire investigators have alerted the state arson unit, and your insurance company has assigned a fraud specialist. We will proceed from here as both an arson case and a potential insurance fraud investigation." The words hung in the air like an icy draft. Insurance fraud, arson, attempted murder. These were not small misunderstandings. These were life-altering crimes. After he left, I lay there in the hospital bed, staring at the wall as the reality settled over me in a suffocating blanket. My brother had not just acted out of desperation or anger. He had planned this. He had stood outside my window and watched the fire spread. He had waited for the flames to finish what he had started. That realization hit me so hard, tears spilled down my temples and soaked into the pillow. I tried to wipe them away, but my arm trembled too much. I thought of my home, my sanctuary, the one place where I had rebuilt myself after years of being cast aside by my own family, and the knowledge that it had been destroyed because someone with my blood in his veins saw me as a financial obstacle instead of a human being, made me feel hollow in a way I had no words for. But beneath the grief and the shock, something else stirred. Not rage, not revenge. Something steadier. Resolve. If my brother wanted to take everything from me, he would learn that I was not the fragile, obedient sister he grew up bullying. I had survived his fire. Now I would survive the truth, and I would not let him hide from what he had done. The morning after Detective Harlan's visit, the insurance fraud investigator arrived at the hospital, a woman named Dana Reyes, who carried herself with the calm precision of someone who had spent years untangling messy, deliberate lies. She introduced herself politely, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that told me she already suspected something deeply wrong with the policy tied to my name. She pulled up a chair beside my bed and opened a thick folder, its edges worn from being handled too many times in too few hours. I braced myself as she began speaking because I could tell from her tone that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. First, she confirmed what I had already suspected. The house fire was being treated as suspicious due to accelerant traces and the unnatural burn pattern in the garage. But then, she lowered her voice and leaned slightly closer. "What concerns us most," she said, tapping the folder, "is the insurance policy itself. According to our system, you initiated a supplemental fire insurance policy 5 weeks ago with expanded coverage, including a fast payout clause for total structural loss." I felt cold all over. I never signed anything like that. I never requested additional coverage. I never even logged into the insurance portal in years. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected me to say exactly that. "The digital signature associated with the policy does not match the one on your original documents. The bank account used for the initial premium withdrawal was not yours, and the IP address used to submit the application was flagged earlier this year in multiple identity theft attempts across the state." The room tilted slightly as her words sank in. Someone had impersonated me. Someone had studied my personal information closely enough to forge a digital signature and navigate the identity verification protocol. She continued flipping through documents as if piecing together a puzzle she already knew the answer to. The policy was submitted at exactly 2:30 in the morning on a weekday. It was approved in under 5 hours due to the false verification. The first premium payment was processed through a prepaid debit card we traced to a convenience store 2 hours from your home. Does that location mean anything to you? My stomach twisted. That town was the same area where my brother used to hang around with friends who drifted in and out of trouble. I told her that and she made another note. It gets more concerning, she added. Someone called our office pretending to be you 3 days before the fire to confirm that in the event of a total loss, we were authorized to direct deposit the settlement into a secondary checking account attached to your profile. The account that was added to your file is not yours. It belongs to an individual named Matthew Cole. The name meant nothing to me, but the investigator continued. We ran the identity. It is a real person, but the account was opened only 1 month ago. Fraud rings commonly use newly created accounts under borrowed names. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry, scraped raw from smoke and fear. So someone forged the policy, set my house on fire, and intended to collect the insurance money. Dana closed the folder gently. Someone intended to profit from the destruction of your home, and based on what you have told detectives, the timing and the financial motive, your brother is the most likely suspect. I felt something inside me crack not from surprise, but from the brutal confirmation of something I already knew too well. My own brother had tried to kill me, not just to scare me or to force me to pay off his debt. He had tried to turn my death into a payout. Dana continued explaining the process. If your house had burned completely and the investigators ruled it an accident, the payout would have been close to $400,000. That number hit me like a blow. My home, my memories, my life were worth that much on paper. To my brother, they were worth nothing more than a quick fix for his growing financial chaos. The investigator then pulled out a printed log of access attempts on my insurance profile. Someone tried logging in using your social security number, birth date, and previous home address 3 times in the past 2 months. They only succeeded when the automated system temporarily lowered verification thresholds during a software update. I stared at the log, horrified at how easily someone could piece together parts of a life and twist them into a weapon. Dana's voice softened. Identity theft is often perpetrated by someone close enough to know the victim's personal background. Family members are unfortunately common sources. I felt my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. This was not just betrayal. This was calculation, premeditation, cruelty. She asked if I wanted the insurance company to formally press charges. My answer came without hesitation. Yes, absolutely. She nodded and stood. I will coordinate with Detective Harlan. Between the arson evidence, the forged insurance policy, the false verification, and the suspicious bank account, this constitutes a major felony case. After she left, I lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand the magnitude of what was happening. My brother had crossed every line imaginable. He had not only tried to force me to sell my home, not only harassed me, stalked me, and broken into my life, but he had tried to profit from my death. I thought of the silhouette outside my window as the flames consumed the garage. I thought of his voice months earlier telling me I owed him. I thought of my parents defending him, begging me to sacrifice everything for him, and I felt something new rise inside me. Not fear, not devastation, but an anchored determination that settled deep and immovable in my chest. If he wanted to destroy me for money, he was going to spend the rest of his life paying for that choice. And as I closed my eyes, exhausted in pain but alive, I whispered to myself the truth I had spent years too afraid to accept. My family had betrayed me, but I would not betray myself. Not ever again. When the hospital finally cleared me to move around on my own, the first thing I asked for was the phone the nurses had locked in a drawer beside my bed. My hands shook as I turned it on, not from weakness, but from the dread of knowing what waited for me once the news spread through my family. I did not have to wait long. Within minutes, 3 unread messages from my mother flashed across the screen, each more frantic than the last. The first was a short line asking if I was alive. The second asked why I had allowed firefighters to tell the neighbors I suspected arson. The third, long and angry, demanded to know why I was spreading lies about my brother. It stunned me that her first instinct was not concern, not relief, but outrage that I had painted her golden child in an unflattering light, even though he had tried to burn me alive. A mixture of disbelief and bitter clarity formed inside me as I stared at her messages. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again. This time, it was my father, his text even more accusatory. He wanted to know what I had told the police, insisted that I must be confused from smoke inhalation, and warned me not to say anything that could ruin my brother's future. The wording was deliberate, calculated dripping with the same entitlement that had shaped every moment of my childhood. For years, they had expected me to absorb every consequence of his choices. Even now, lying in a hospital bed with burned lungs and a destroyed home, they wanted me to protect him. Rage finally broke through the exhaustion, a sharp heat that felt different than the fire I had survived, but just as consuming. I did not respond. Instead, I turned off my phone and tried to breathe through the ache in my chest. Peace lasted less than an hour. A knock came at the hospital room door, and when it opened, my parents walked in as if nothing in the world were out of place. My mother was already crying, though the tears felt strangely performative, her voice carrying the same shaky tone she used when she wanted something. My father's face was tight and stern, but his eyes avoided mine, a sign I recognized from childhood that he had already chosen a side. My mother reached for me, but I pulled my hand back, and the expression she gave me was wounded, as if she were the victim. "Why are you accusing your brother?" she asked through tears. "Why would you say something so horrible when he has been trying so hard to turn his life around?" I stared at her, stunned that she could stand there in a clean blouse and pressed jeans while I lay bruised and bandaged and still treat this like an inconvenience rather than attempted murder. My father stepped forward, his voice low, and controlled the same tone he used to use when scolding me for something my brother had done. "You need to stop this right now. The police are overreacting. Your brother was nowhere near your house that night. You are confused. Trauma does that to people." My voice came out colder than the air in the room. "I saw him, outside my window. He watched the fire spread." My mother flinched, but not from guilt, from indignation. "That is impossible. He told us he was home. He would never do something like that. He loves you." I almost laughed. "Loves me." The man who forged my signature, filed for insurance in my name, and set my home on fire out of greed and entitlement, somehow loved me. The truth was bitter on my tongue, but I forced myself to speak it. "Your son tried to kill me." My father's nostrils flared with offense. "You do not know what you are talking about. You have always misunderstood him. He has been under pressure. He has been struggling. This attack on him is going to destroy what little future he has left." There it was, the same pattern I had lived with my entire life. Protect him at all costs. Sacrifice me without hesitation. My entire childhood flashed back in fragments. Every moment I had been punished for his mistakes. Every time I had been told to give up something so he could have more. Every memory of scraped knees, broken promises, and hollow apologies. I looked at my parents in that hospital room and saw them clearly for the first time. They would burn the world down before letting their son face the consequences of his actions. My mother's tears grew harder, but now she looked desperate rather than sad. "Please do not press charges. Please just tell them it was an accident. If you cooperate, they will drop it. Family needs to stay together." That last line, after everything, made something inside me snap clean in half. I sat up straighter despite the pain slicing through my ribs. Family. I repeated it slowly, tasting the word as if it were something foreign. "You watched me work for years to build a life on my own because you never helped me. You cast me out when I would not give him money. You refused to answer a single call for years, and now you want me to lie to protect the man who tried to kill me." My father clenched his jaw. "You owe him. He is your brother. You owe the family." I shook my head. "No, I owe myself the truth. And I owe justice to the person he could have killed. Me." My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing at full volume now, but the sound felt hollow like an echo rather than genuine grief. She covered her face with her hands, and my father put an arm around her protectively, as if I had committed some unspeakable cruelty. The door opened then, and Detective Harlan stepped inside. He looked from me to them and back again, instantly reading the tension in the room. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his tone more warning than question. My father straightened as if preparing for battle. "We were just telling our daughter that she is confused and needs to retract her statement." The detective's expression did not change, but something sharpened behind his eyes. "That will not be happening. Evidence is already moving this case toward criminal charges. If you try to influence her testimony, it will be added to the report." My parents stiffened, and for the first time since they walked in, they looked genuinely afraid. Not afraid for me, afraid for themselves. Their golden child was losing his shine, their control was slipping, and the collapse of the family they built around Lai's favoritism and denial had finally begun. Without another word, they left the room, my mother crying softly, my father walking stiffly beside her, both refusing to look back at me. For the first time in my life, I felt no urge to chase after them. No guilt, no fear, only the quiet truth that sometimes a family breaks long before the world sees the cracks. And sometimes the fire simply reveals what was already ashes. The shift from suspicion to full criminal investigation happened faster than even I expected, as if the moment the truth cracked open, every hidden detail of my brother's scheme came spilling out into the light. 2 days after my parents stormed out of my hospital room, Detective Harlan returned this time with a thick case folder that he placed carefully on the rolling table beside my bed. His expression was professional, but there was a gravity to his posture that warned me the news would hit hard, even if I thought I was prepared. He began by explaining that the State Arson Unit had completed the preliminary analysis, and the results left no room for doubt. Laboratory tests confirmed the presence of a petroleum-based accelerant in multiple locations inside the garage, concentrated along the wall closest to the breaker panel, creating the exact conditions necessary for a rapid flash fire. The burn patterns matched intentional ignition, not an accidental short, not a faulty appliance, not a spontaneous mechanical malfunction. Then he opened the folder and showed me photographs. They were clinical but still deeply unsettling. Blackened floorboards, melted plastic, distinct V-shaped burns where flames had climbed unnaturally fast. I forced myself to look at each image, reminding myself that this was evidence, not a memory I needed to relive. Once I nodded, he continued. A neighbor 2 houses down had captured video from a doorbell camera. The footage showed a vehicle turning onto my street at 1:18 in the morning, driving without headlights, stopping near my driveway for less than a minute, then pulling forward and parking a short distance away. Several minutes later, the same vehicle's brake lights flickered as though someone had shifted in the driver's seat. The timestamp matched perfectly with the estimated ignition window. The detective slid a printed still frame toward me. The dark SUV with a distinctive dent above the rear wheel well was unmistakable. My lungs tightened as I whispered, "That is my brother's car." He nodded once. "We are working to obtain a search warrant. We already coded him as a primary suspect based on your testimony, the forged insurance policy, the suspicious activity on your profile, and the financial motive." I let out a shaky breath as the truth solidified into something irrefutable and official. The detective continued by explaining that the insurance company had shared all digital records. They traced the IP address used to purchase the fraudulent policy to a Wi-Fi network registered under the name of someone my brother had lived with briefly earlier in the year. The same address was also flagged in a separate investigation for identity theft. There were more logs, too. Phone records showed several late-night calls between my brother and a prepaid burner number that had been used the same night to contact the insurance company's automated verification line. A digital forensics analyst had traced a partial fingerprint on the gas can found near my property line. The print was smudged and incomplete, but enough ridge detail matched my brother's previous employment background check record to justify further testing. I felt the room tilt slightly as the detective spoke. It was overwhelming. Not because the evidence surprised me, but because hearing it laid out so plainly erased any lingering part of me that hoped this was some terrible misunderstanding. No, It was exactly what it appeared to be. He had planned this down to the smallest detail. Detective Harlan then explained that the district attorney's office had officially opened a criminal case and was preparing to bring it before a grand jury. The charges were staggering in their severity: arson in the first degree, attempted murder, aggravated identity theft insurance fraud, burglary-related enhancements for unlawful entry with intent to commit a felony, and reckless endangerment. He told me that if convicted, my brother could face more than a decade in prison, possibly much longer, depending on how prosecutors structured the sentencing recommendations. My chest tightened with complicated emotions: relief that justice was finally moving, fear of what came next, and an unexpected grief not for him, but for the version of family I had once believed could exist, if only I worked hard enough to hold it together. The detective paused before continuing, his voice steady but empathetic. "There is something else you should know. We interviewed your parents." My stomach dropped. He went on carefully. "They initially tried to minimize your brother's involvement and said you were confused, but under formal questioning, they contradicted themselves multiple times. There is reason to believe they knew he was in deeper financial trouble than they admitted, and that they deliberately withheld that information during the early stages of this investigation. At this time, they are not being charged, but they are being monitored for potential obstruction." A wave of exhaustion washed over me, so heavy I felt it in my bones. My own parents had tried to obstruct an arson and attempted murder investigation. Not to protect me, but to protect him. I asked the detective if my brother knew he was a suspect. He exhaled slowly. "Based on his family's behavior, likely, yes. But we are moving quickly. We have filed for warrants to search his residence, his vehicle, and all electronic devices. If he runs, federal authorities will be notified." His tone left no room for interpretation. They were preparing for every possibility. He closed his folder and looked at me with a seriousness that made my skin prickle. "I need to ask you something. Will you be willing to testify if this goes to trial?" I swallowed hard, feeling both terror and resolve settle inside me like twin weights. I nodded. "Yes, I will testify. I want the truth on record." He gave a single respectful nod. "That is enough for now." When he left, the room felt too quiet. The hum of machines seemed louder, the air colder, the light harsher. I stared at the ceiling and let the reality wash over me. The investigation was no longer about suspicion or possibility. It had become a criminal case with mounting evidence, growing momentum, and serious consequences. My brother had chosen greed over blood, violence over family, murder over responsibility, and now the law was closing in around him like a tightening net. The fire had nearly taken my life, but it had exposed something even deeper. My family was not collapsing because of the investigation. It had collapsed long before that. The investigation merely revealed how far the fractures had spread, and for the first time I felt something like strength returning. Not because the danger was gone, but because the truth was finally being named out loud by people with the power to do something about it. The morning my brother was arrested began with an eerie calm that felt so out of place it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I had been discharged from the hospital 2 days earlier, still weak, still coughing, still unable to sleep more than an hour at a time without waking from nightmares of smoke and flames. I was staying temporarily in a secure hotel arranged by the Victim Assistance Office, a modest place with beige walls and thick curtains, but it felt safer than any house I had ever lived in with my family. The sun had barely risen when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I flinched hard, my nerves still frayed from everything that had happened. It was Detective Harlan. His voice was calm but alert. "We have movement," he said. "Your brother left his residence an hour ago and headed north on Route 7. A patrol car picked him up on an automated plate reader. We believe he is attempting to travel out of state." My pulse spiked and I gripped the phone tighter. "Is he trying to run?" The detective exhaled. "That is what it looks like. We are coordinating with multiple units. Stay where you are. You will get a call when we have him in custody." The line went dead, and for the next 30 minutes I sat rigid on the edge of the bedphone in my lap, staring at the muted television that played a morning show full of cheerful hosts who might as well have been speaking a different language. My world had narrowed to one single point. They were closing in on him, the man who had lit my house on fire, The man who had forged my signature, the man who had watched me choke on smoke while he stood outside waiting for the flames to finish what he started. Then the phone rang again, and I nearly dropped it in my scramble to answer. "We have eyes on him," Detective Harlan said, his tone clipped with urgency. "He is at a gas station just across the county line. Units are moving in now." I could hear radios crackling faintly in the background. He added, "You do not need to be here for this." I appreciated the reassurance, but I could not stop myself from whispering, "Please tell me when it is done." I stayed on the line silent except for my erratic breathing as the detective narrated the unfolding scene like a calm anchor on a broadcast meant only for me. Officers are approaching the vehicle. He is inside the car, head down, possibly going through documents. We are making contact. A pause. Then louder voices on his end of the line. "Police. Hands where we can see them. Step out of the vehicle." My body tensed as if I were the one being confronted. Then the detective said, "He is refusing to exit. Officers are warning him." Another tense beat. Still refusing. Then suddenly a shift in tone. "He is stepping out now." Hands raised, complying. A door slammed in the background. Unintelligible shouting, and then the words I had been waiting to hear since the night flames swallowed my home. "He is in custody." Relief hit me so hard I had to steady myself against the nightstand. My knees gave out for a moment, and I sank to the floor, breathing in short, uneven bursts. The detective continued. He attempted to argue with officers and claimed he was being framed. He repeated multiple times that you were lying because you wanted to destroy him. My chest tightened, but not from fear. From recognition. The tactic was predictable. My entire childhood had been built around him rewriting reality and everyone else accepting it. The detective went on. "We found several concerning items in the vehicle. Documents with your name and identifying information. A prepaid debit card matching the payment used for the fraudulent policy. A notebook filled with numbers, dates, and what appears to be payout projections." That last part made my skin crawl. Projections. As if my life were a financial chart he had been calculating, planning, and gambling with. And then the detective said something that shook me in a different way. There was also a duffel bag in the trunk containing clothing cash and travel supplies. Based on what we recovered, it looks like he intended to leave the state for a while. Maybe permanently. I pressed my hand to my forehead. The man who had tried to kill me planned to vanish afterward, leaving behind the chaos he created, the debt he refused to face, and the family who always protected him at the cost of everything else. The detective assured me that my brother would be transported to the county detention center and held without bail due to the severity of the charges. Arson in the first degree, attempted murder, felony fraud, identity theft, insurance scheme. Each word felt like a puncture releasing years of pressure building beneath my skin. When I ended the call, I sat on the hotel room carpet surrounded by silence that finally felt like a friend instead of a threat. I did not cry at first. Not from shock, not from fear, but from something deeper, something like release. As the weight lifted, tears finally came soft at first, then unstoppable. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that for the first time in my life, someone else was holding him accountable. I received another call an hour later from a victim advocate confirming the arrest. She explained my rights, the timeline for the arraignment, and what would happen next. Her voice was gentle and steady, grounding me as she told me I would be notified of every court date, every development, every decision. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time before whispering into the empty room, "He cannot hurt me anymore." My brother was behind bars. My parents could no longer shield him with denial or manipulation. The justice system had stepped into the space where family had failed me. And as I absorbed that truth, a thought rose to the surface with painful clarity. The fire had taken my home. But the arrest gave me something I never expected to have again. Safety. And maybe eventually something even harder to imagine. Peace. The trial began 6 months after my brother's arrest, long enough for the physical burns on my shoulder to fade into pale scars, but not nearly long enough for the memory of smoke clawing into my lungs to soften. The courthouse was a tall beige building that always looked cold no matter how bright the sun was, and on the morning of jury selection, I stood outside its front steps feeling smaller than I had in years. A victim advocate met me at the entrance and escorted me past the metal detectors, her calm presence grounding me in a way nothing else could. She directed me to a private waiting room reserved for witnesses, but curiosity pulled me toward the hallway leading to the courtroom. Through the narrow window in the door, I saw them. My parents sat in the gallery on the right side, rigid and pale, their hands clasped tightly as if bracing for impact. They looked older than I remembered, weighed down by consequences they never believed would reach them. My brother sat at the defendant table in an ill-fitting suit, his hands cuffed loosely in front of him. His face was thinner, sharper, as if resentment had carved new lines overnight. When he lifted his eyes and saw me standing behind the glass, something flickered in his expression. Not remorse, not fear, but a simmering anger, as though he still believed I was ruining his life, rather than simply surviving what he had done to mine. I stepped back before he could hold my gaze any longer, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The first 2 days were procedural, filled with legal jargon motions and testimony from fire investigators, digital analysts, and insurance fraud specialists. Every technical detail built another brick in the wall around him. They explained the accelerant patterns with calm, scientific certainty. They presented forensic proof that his fingerprint matched the gas can. They played clips of the security footage showing his SUV arriving on my street minutes before ignition. When the analyst demonstrated how his digital trail led to the forged insurance policy, the jurors shifted in their seats, the weight of intent becoming impossible to ignore. I watched from my designated section, hands folded tightly in my lap, my lungs tightening every time a new piece of evidence connected another dot in the horrifying picture of what he had done. My parents refused to look at me. Not once. Their eyes were glued to the defense table, to the son they could not bear to believe capable of such darkness. On the 4th day, it was my turn to testify. A deputy escorted me to the witness stand, and every step felt heavier than the last. When I sat down and placed my hand on the Bible, the courtroom seemed to shrink, pulling every face, every sound, every light into sharp focus. The prosecutor approached with a reassuring nod and began gently. She asked me to recount my relationship with my brother, my parents, the financial pressure they placed on me, and the night of the fire. Speaking the truth under oath felt different than telling it in a hospital room or to investigators. It felt final, like carving words into stone. I described the smell of burning plastic, the explosion in the garage, the suffocating smoke filling the hallway, and the silhouette outside my window that had frozen me with a kind of recognition I wished I could forget. My voice trembled, but I did not break. I told the court about the forged policy, the late-night harassment, the strange SUV, and the growing fear that had wrapped itself around my life until I could barely breathe. As I spoke, I let myself glance at my parents once. My mother's expression was a twisted mix of shock and denial, her lips parted like she might interrupt if she could. My father's jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed, refusing to absorb the truth even as it unfolded inches from him. But my brother stared at me without blinking, his face unreadable, his posture stiff. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, the air in the room shifted. He tried to suggest that my memory was compromised by smoke inhalation. He implied that I had misunderstood the silhouette outside the window. He even hinted that my financial independence created resentment that might have influenced my recollection. The jurors' faces tightened with discomfort at his accusations. My voice strengthened as I answered each question calmly and factually, refusing to allow him to twist the narrative into something palatable for the man who had tried to kill me. When he finally stepped back, I exhaled slowly, a trembling breath that felt like a release. The final blow to my brother's defense came on day 6 when the prosecutor introduced the notebook found in his car. Inside were payout estimates, dates, notes about my insurance limits, and even handwritten reminders about when I would most likely be home alone. Some jurors gasped softly. My mother covered her mouth. My father's face crumpled in a way I had never seen. Even my brother's mask slipped for a moment, revealing a panic he could not contain. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for just under 8 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The foreperson stood holding a sheet of paper with steady hands. On the charge of arson in the first degree, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of aggravated identity theft, guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, guilty. Each verdict struck like a bolt of lightning, slicing through years of denial, excuses, manipulation, and favoritism. My mother sobbed openly. My father stared straight ahead, like a man watching the collapse of something he believed indestructible. My brother's shoulders slumped as the last word echoed across the courtroom, a quiet surrender to the truth he had spent months trying to outrun. I did not celebrate. I did not smile. But I felt an overwhelming, steady warmth spread through me, not joy, but justice. A sense that for the first time in my life, the world had chosen to believe me over him. As the judge ordered my brother remanded into custody pending sentencing, I rose from my seat and walked quietly toward the exit. I did not look at my parents. I did not look back at him. I walked out of that courtroom knowing the truth had finally spoken louder than blood. Sentencing day arrived with the dull heaviness of a storm that had been building on the horizon for months, thick with a tension that clung to my skin the moment I stepped out of the car and walked toward the courthouse steps. The air was cold enough to sting my throat, but I welcomed the sharpness because it reminded me I was alive, standing on solid ground, breathing freely in a way I had not been able to since the night flames swallowed my home. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt different than during the trial. This time there was no jury, no spectators shifting uncomfortably as evidence unfolded, no long technical testimonies from investigators. It was quieter, heavier, as if everyone present knew a terrible truth was about to be stamped into permanence by the authority only a judge could wield. My parents were already seated in the gallery, their faces drawn and pale, worn down from months of denial colliding with reality. My mother clutched a tissue with trembling hands, her eyes red and swollen, while my father stared straight ahead, not at their son, not at me, but at some fixed point on the wood paneling, as though refusing to acknowledge the world as it was. My brother sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit now, instead of the ill-fitting suit from trial. His wrists were cuffed, his shoulders slumped, and yet there was still something defiant in the way he held his jaw, as though pride were the last possession he refused to surrender. When I entered, he glanced at me for the briefest moment, and the look he gave me was not remorse. It was resentment, raw and unfiltered, as if he still believed I had ruined him rather than simply survived him. The judge took her seat and began reviewing the charges, each one delivered with the steady rhythm of a gavel striking stone. Arson in the first degree, attempted murder, aggravated identity theft, fraudulent insurance claim, criminal intent to obtain financial gain through destruction of property. Each phrase echoed across the room like a reminder that the fire had not simply consumed wood and drywall, but had exposed every lie my family had built itself upon. The prosecutor delivered a concise but devastating summary of the case, emphasizing the planning, the financial motive, the forged documents, the accelerant, and the notebook found in my brother's car. She argued passionately for a lengthy sentence to protect the public and honor the gravity of the crime. When it was the defense attorney's turn, he attempted the same arguments he had used during trial. Mental stress, financial desperation, a troubled upbringing, a plea for mercy. But his words drifted through the room with no weight, like a faint draft that could not move even a single page on the judge's desk. Then the judge asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement. I stood, legs trembling slightly, but my voice remained steady as I approached the podium. I spoke of the night of the fire, the suffocation, the terror, the moment I saw him outside my window watching the flames rise. I spoke of the burns on my shoulder, the nightmares, the anxiety that haunted every breath in the weeks afterward. I spoke of the home I lost, the sense of safety stolen from me, the years of manipulation that had led to this moment. And finally, I spoke of the truth I had spent a lifetime afraid to say aloud. I deserved to live without fear. I deserved a family who did not treat me as a resource to exploit or a burden to discard. When I sat down, the room was silent, except for my mother's muffled sobs. Then the judge began delivering the sentence, her voice firm and deliberate. On the charge of arson in the first degree, 18 years. On the charge of attempted murder, 15 years to run consecutively. On the charge of aggravated identity theft, 8 years concurrent. On the charge of insurance fraud, 5 years concurrent. In total, my brother would serve between 29 and 33 years, depending on parole eligibility. A sharp gasp came from my mother as she crumpled against my father, who wrapped an arm around her mechanically, his face pale. My brother jerked in his seat as though the words had physically struck him. His eyes widened, his bravado evaporating in a single heartbeat. 30 years. He would be in his late 50s when he walked out of prison, if he walked out at all. As deputies rose to escort him away, he twisted in his restraints and shouted, "This is your fault! You did this to me! You ruined my life!" His voice cracked with a desperation so intense it almost startled me, but instead of flinching, I sat still, letting his words fall uselessly between us. The judge ordered him removed from the courtroom, and as the deputies pulled him toward the exit, he kept shouting, voice echoing down the hallway until the doors finally closed behind him. The silence that followed was heavy but strangely peaceful, as if the courthouse itself took a long exhale. Afterward, I walked past my parents without a word. My mother reached for me weakly, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Please, he is still your brother. You cannot abandon us now." But I did not stop. I did not look back. For years, I had mistaken their demands for loyalty, their manipulation for love, their cruelty for family tradition. But standing there in the corridor with sunlight streaming through the high windows, I understood that walking away was not abandonment. It was survival. In the weeks that followed, the consequences rippled outward. My parents' finances collapsed under legal fees and restitution orders. They were forced to sell their house and move into a cramped rental apartment outside town. Insurance companies filed civil claims against them for attempting to interfere with the investigation, draining what little savings they had left. Mutual friends stopped calling, some out of discomfort, others out of quiet support for the side they believed deserved justice. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, living temporarily in a small rental until I found a new home of my own. It did not erase the past, but it gave me something my brother had tried to steal: a future. And as winter gave way to spring, I planted a small garden outside my new front door, flowers that would bloom each year no matter how harsh the season before. Proof that even after fire, something new could grow. The first morning in my new home felt strangely quiet, almost unreal, as if the world itself were holding its breath to see what I would do, now that the smoke had cleared and the courtroom echoes had faded into memory. I stood barefoot in my small kitchen, sunlight pouring through the windows in soft sheets that warmed the floorboards, and for the first time in years, I felt the absence of fear. No footsteps pacing outside at midnight. No anonymous insurance letters. No strangers' cars idling across the street. And no brother lurking in the shadows of my life, waiting for the next opportunity to pull me back into the chaos he had built around himself like a fortress. Just silence. Just space. Just me. Freedom always sounded like a dramatic concept you read in books or saw in movies, but in reality it felt like the steady hum of the refrigerator, the soft chirping of birds outside, and the simple comfort of knowing no one expected anything from me except to live. My new house was smaller than the one that had burned, but it felt warmer somehow, as if it had been waiting for me. I spent the first week painting its rooms in calming colors and assembling furniture at my own pace. No deadlines, no demands. No guilt. With each stroke of the paint roller and each screw tightened on a new bookshelf, I felt pieces of myself returning, pieces I had not even realized were missing. Therapy became a regular part of my life, not because I was broken, but because I needed to understand how I had survived so long in a family that treated me like a tool instead of a daughter. My therapist helped me untangle years of emotional conditioning, the way I had been taught to sacrifice without question to solve everyone else's problems while ignoring my own. She helped me name the things I had endured: manipulation, scapegoating, financial exploitation, learned guilt, and the quiet emotional bruises that had accumulated long before the physical ones. With each session, I learned to breathe again, deeper and easier, until one day, I realized I no longer woke up expecting something bad to happen. One evening, months after the sentencing, I drove to the site where my old house had once stood. The lot was empty now, except for a few charred stones from the foundation and a patch of stubborn wild grass. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the cool air, listening to the crickets. There was no anger left, no grief, not anymore. Just a strange, bittersweet gratitude that the worst night of my life had also been the moment that shattered the illusion I had been living under. I whispered a quiet goodbye, not to the house, but to the version of me who had once believed she had to earn love by suffering. On weekends, I began exploring small joys that had been missing for years. I joined a gardening class at the local community center and met neighbors who welcomed me without asking for anything in return. I planted tomatoes and basil in raised beds beside my new porch, watching them grow taller each week. I found a simple pleasure in tending to them, an act of nurturing that asked nothing more from me than patience. I started taking long walks at sunrise, letting the soft glow warm my face as I listened to the world wake up. I drank coffee on my porch without glancing over my shoulder. I laughed more. I slept deeply. I lived. My parents reached out twice in the following months, both times through short, strained emails. They wanted to talk. They wanted to explain. They wanted to reconnect. I responded politely but firmly. I told them I wished them peace, but I needed distance. I needed space to heal, and I would not reopen the door to the cycle that had nearly cost me my life. They did not write again, and for the first time, that silence felt like a blessing. I did not follow the details of my brother's life in prison, though occasionally the victim advocate sent brief updates. He was adjusting poorly. He had outbursts. He blamed everyone but himself. But none of that belonged to me anymore. The weight of his choices was finally on his shoulders, not mine. One day, while repotting my plants, I caught myself humming without realizing it. It was a simple moment, but it struck me with unexpected force. It had been years since music had come naturally to me. Years since I felt light enough to hum or sing or even sway to a rhythm my body had forgotten it knew. I sat down on the porch steps, hands still covered in soil, and let the realization wash over me. I was happy. Not perfectly, not constantly, but genuinely. I began hosting small dinners for a few friends from work, something I never would have done before for fear of judgment from people who once claimed to love me. We laughed, shared meals, told stories, and I realized that family was not defined by blood, but by kindness and respect. One afternoon at the garden center, an older woman watering the herbs next to me asked why I kept smelling basil plants before selecting one. I laughed and told her it reminded me of the first home I ever chose for myself. She smiled softly and said, "That means you are planting memory, not just food." I carried her words with me. As summer turned to fall, I finally understood something that had taken me a lifetime to grasp. Some homes burn, some families fall apart, and some fires do not destroy you. They reveal you. They clear the ground so something stronger, truer, and freer can grow in its place. Standing on my porch, listening to the wind rustle through the garden I had built from nothing, I knew one truth with absolute certainty. The fire my brother set had nearly taken my life, but in the end, it had given me something he never expected. It had set me free. If you stayed with me through this entire journey through the smoke, the courtroom, the betrayals, and the rebuilding, then I want to say something to you now, not as a character in a story, but as a person who survived something she never imagined she would face. There are moments in life when you look around and realize that the people you trusted the most were the ones who hurt you the deepest, and you sit there wondering how long you lived with the warning signs without letting yourself see them. If you have been there, if you have ever felt like you were carrying the weight of a family that only called your name when they wanted something from you, then you already understand more of my story than I could ever put into words. I know many of you watching this have lived through your own versions of fire, maybe not literal flames licking up the walls of your home, but emotional ones that burned just as hot and just as painfully. Maybe for you it was a sibling who drained your savings. Maybe it was a parent who always took the other side no matter how wrong it felt. Maybe it was a spouse who promised love while slowly dimming your light year after year. Or maybe, like me, it was the moment you realized that the only way to save yourself was to walk away, even if you had to walk alone. If my story made you angry, if you felt your hands clench or your chest tighten while I fought to breathe through smoke that someone in my own bloodline created, let that anger sit with you for a moment. Because you felt that way for a reason. You recognized injustice. You recognized manipulation. You recognized a pattern you have seen before, maybe too many times. And if you felt relief at the end, If you felt a kind of quiet release when justice finally landed where it belonged, then maybe you needed that closure too. I want you to know something that took me years to understand. Family is not defined by DNA. It is defined by who shows up with love, with honesty, with respect, with consistency. Sometimes the hardest choice is the one that saves your life, and sometimes the bravest thing you will ever do is saying no to the people who raised you. If you are watching this and something in your heart whispered that you deserve more, that you deserve peace, that you deserve safety, then I hope you listen to that voice. I hope you take one small step toward protecting yourself, even if that step is only admitting the truth you have been avoiding. And if you want to share your story, if you want to let someone finally hear what you have carried silently for years, the comments are open for you. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what time it is there. But more importantly, tell me if you have ever found yourself standing in the middle of emotional smoke, trying to breathe, trying to escape a fire someone else set in your life. Have you ever been the one who kept giving and giving until there was nothing left for you? Have you ever faced a moment when you realized you were worth saving even if no one else believed it? Your voice matters here. Your story matters here. And you are not alone. If my journey reminded you of resilience you forgot you had or strength you thought was gone, then stay with this channel. There are more stories coming, more truths to lift the weight off your chest, more endings where justice is not just a hope, but a promise delivered. If you have ever survived a family storm, a betrayal, a loss, or a moment when you felt the ground shaking beneath you, then you belong here in this community of people who have endured, who have rebuilt, and who understand that sometimes fire destroys, but sometimes it clears a path you never would have walked otherwise. And before you go, if my story meant something to you, even a little, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let YouTube know that stories like this matter. It helps more people find their own strength. Thank you for listening to mine.